Hello, welcome back to the Arturia Pigments 3 tutorial series. Today we're beginning our look at one of the most important concepts as far as this synth is concerned, and in fact many synths, and that's modulation. This is the ability to change values dynamically without us having to manually interact with the synth, and it just completely opens out whole new vistas of sound for us, as hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate. Now at the outset I'm going to use low frequency oscillators as my demonstration tool, so we'll need to talk about those a little bit. But today I really want to focus on the modulation suite itself, and in the next episode we'll have a really deep dive into LFOs and see everything that they can do. Now basically the bottom half of the synth is almost completely devoted to modulation, but it's done in quite an unusual way. Firstly, we've got a rectangle that I'm drawing with my mouse at the moment, which is an overview of all of the various modulation controls all in one. And then everything underneath allows us to drill down to see what the actual modulation source is itself. It's much easier to demonstrate than try to explain. So we're going to have a look at LFOs. So you can see as I click between these various coloured tabs at the bottom of the screen, we get different suites of modulation engines available to us. And these are our 3 low frequency oscillators that you get in Pigments. Can you see as I'm kind of just moving my mouse left and right, there's actually a yellow highlighted rectangle appearing slightly above. If I click on any one of those little yellow rectangles, then we see a new view. This is showing you all of the things that LFO1 is currently mapped to, and the answer is actually nothing. So let's make our first modulation connection, and we're going to map the filter cutoff to LFO1. Now it's incredibly easy to do if you know how to do it. All I have to do is move to the outside of the control that I want to modulate, and as soon as I do, I get a yellow circle. What I'm going to do is click down with my mouse, move my mouse up, and you can see there's a numbers going 0.23, 0.28 and so on and so on. And as I do so, I'm beginning to draw a thick yellow line within that thin line. This is the current modulation range. Now at the moment, the cutoff knob is turned all the way up, and can you see that we've just got this little highlighted, it's really difficult to see, but the LFO is actually updating in real time. If I go to the middle of the knob and turn the actual cutoff value down, watch what happens to that thick yellow zone. It tracks with the knob as I move it anti-clockwise. Now I'm moving it clockwise again. The knob's set at 12 o'clock, and the center point of that modulation arc is also set to 12 o'clock. Now the LFO is currently in a bipolar state, which means it's doing positive values and negative values. As it draws this sine wave, it's basically moving left and right around this thick yellow zone, and the size of the zone is telling us how much it's moving to the left or right. So I'm going to press a key and we'll hear what we've got so far. So we're hearing the pulse of the low frequency oscillator being applied as a modulation source to the filter cutoff. Let's make it a little bit more intense by giving us a nice resonance spike. Makes it much easier to hear what's going on. And now you can see that the LFO is corresponding to the increase and decrease of cutoff rate that we're hearing from this modulation. If I increase the cutoff knob, we're still getting exactly the same modulation being applied to the cutoff knob, but it's operating over a different range. Bring it down, it'll be really dull. Let's take a different approach to applying a modulation source. This time I'm going to deal with the resonance knob, but I don't want to apply an LFO to it. I want to do something else. I actually want to apply an envelope to it. So we're going to step very briefly out of our comfort zone, but it will really help me demonstrate what's going on. I'm going to close this modulation window down so that we're no longer exclusively looking at LFO1. We're back to looking at all of the modulation sources simultaneously. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply an envelope to this resonance knob. And the way I'm going to do it is by clicking this little plus button, which immediately puts me in modulation mode. And Pigments is now saying to you, what do you want to map to that resonance knob? Well, the answer is I want to map envelope 2 to it. Can you see envelope 1 is like permanently assigned as a volume control, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to deal with envelope 2. And as soon as I hover over envelope 2 and begin a click and drag to apply an envelope amount, it's immediately assigned this modulation source to this modulation destination. They are now mapped, and this little red haze in the background is telling me that envelope 2 is mapped to something. I close that view down and we tab across to the envelopes. We can now see that envelope 2 is mapped to the filter resonance. So there are multiple different respects in which you can view the modulation sources and the modulation destinations and the relationship between them. And rather than trying to kind of fix your brain into thinking this is the way I must work, I'm trying to show you multiple different angles all at once, which can be initially confusing, but hopefully it gives you a more holistic view of what's going on in the synth. So here we are now, we just flipped across to the envelopes. Here are all of our envelopes. This is envelope 2. It's telling us that it's mapped to the filter resonance at this amount. And so this envelope shape is going to be applied to the resonance knob every time I hit a key. You can see the envelope and hear it being applied to the filter. The thing that I really wanted you to focus on is the fact that this part circle is now orange. So whatever modulation source is currently being viewed, we see that colour. There's absolutely nothing stopping us applying an LFO to resonance 1 as well. Let's do that. So I'm going to close down out of my envelope view. I want to look at LFOs instead, so I click on the LFO tab. And now let's pick LFO 2. And as soon as I move my cursor to the outside of the resonance control, now the part circle's yellow. Give it some of that. So now that knob is being controlled by 2 different modulation sources. We haven't overwritten the envelope stuff that we did a few moments ago. So in addition to the resonance being controlled by that really sharp envelope spike, we're now also going to have that sine wave modulation applied to it. Both of those controls are going to sum together. And now you can see I'm waiting for the curve to go flat and then pressing a key, and it immediately spikes really sharp. That's the envelope doing its job. But if I hold it down, you can see the resonance spike flattening out and getting big, flattening out and getting big. That's the LFO being applied. So both of these sources are operating on the same control at the same time. Now you might think to yourself, well, where's the orange halo gone? Why can I only see the yellow one? That's because we're in LFO mode at the moment. We're looking at the LFO2 modulation sources. We close the envelope down. We lose the sight of either circular ring, so now we can't see from looking at the resonance knob that there's anything mapped to it until we hover over it. And then you see those 2 orange and yellow glows telling you that this control is mapped to 2 different modulation sources. As soon as I move my mouse away, those halos disappear, but they are there. Similarly, I can press the plus button, which zooms me right in directly into the resonance knob. And now you can see all of the values of all of the modulation sources that are currently mapped to the filter resonance, and you can see 0.38 of envelope 2 with the orange halo in the background, and the 0.24 of the LFO with the yellow halo in the background. So there's an awful lot of information, and I understand that this is really overwhelming when you first come to it. But just basically, if you pick 2 controls like I have today and try to keep your view really, really simple, and just click all of the different things that you can click, you'll see all of the different angles of context and view that you've got. So at the moment we're looking directly at the resonance control, and so we can see both of the modulation sources in a kind of zoomed out view. Close that view down and look directly at LFO2 by clicking its name, and we get a really detailed view of exactly what it's doing to the F1 resonance, to the filter's resonance. And then obviously I can increase or decrease the modulation amount by clicking in the control inside the window, or I can go over to the knob and do it there. Over on the left hand side, this gives you an overview of everything to do with LFO2, and we've got a little drop down menu. So I'm going to drop that down, and now you can see I can mute all modulations. At the moment I've only got one thing mapped to LFO2. Let's unmute them again and assign something else. Let's, just because we're really homing in on these two controls today, I'm just going to assign some filter 1 cutoff to it as well. And then you can see both of those controls are mapped to LFO2. Mute them both, unmute them both, and I can remove them both. That's pretty straightforward. I can click on these little yellow rectangles to change my perspective, to show me which modulation source I'm really interested in looking at all of the destinations for it. I've got a view in the window below of the source values, and this is what we'll deal with in greater detail in the next episode, where we really drill into the LFO and see all of the stuff we can do with it. And I've also got my yellow part circle around the cutoff knob to tell me that that's my current focus. So if I head over to LFO2, you'll see there's a yellow circle around both of those controls because LFO2 is mapped to them both. Now I'm not aware of any limit to the number of things that you can map, so I could go absolutely crazy on this synthesizer and start mapping all sorts of controls, and you can see there's almost no limit to what can be mapped. You know, a couple of the controls can't be, but most of them can. And if you get so many that you can't see them all, it gives you a scroll bar and you can actually see them all that way. And at which point the ability to mute them all becomes far more interesting. Shut that view down, get back to our overview. And now you can see everything that's been mapped to something is highlighted, and you can see what its current state is. And this is all real time. Every time I press a key on the keyboard, because we mapped something to envelope 2 earlier, you see the envelope draw its shape. You see the LFOs dynamically change in accordance with the key triggers that are being sent to them. So these views aren't just some kind of fancy overlay. That is a real-time representation of the amplitude of all of these modulation sources. Really fabulous. Amazing, amazing interface. Just look at all of these controls modulating, dynamically. It's really awesome stuff. I've just reset the engine to its default state because I've just remembered I didn't show you a thing. I need to show you side chaining. So what I'm going to do is quickly set up my LFO1 again. There we go. We've got a nice, healthy, identifiable LFO sweep. Now let's have a look at what that looks like in the LFO viewer. So here we have our 33% modulation being applied to the filter cutoff, and we've got our yellow arc. Everything's fine so far. Now what I'm going to do is map a second LFO via the side chain, and this wave is now going to modulate this wave. So it's going to impose a positive or negative modulation amount on the amount of wave number 1. So if I slow this right down and press a key, you hear it be really bright and then really dull. So LFO1 is still cycling, it's still doing its thing, but LFO2 is imposing a second layer of modulation over the top. Now this is pretty advanced stuff, but this just really illustrates the power of this engine. Not only have you got the ability to map a modulation source to just about every control in the synthesizer, but you can modulate that modulation source with a second modulation just as an intrinsic baked-in part of the interface. You don't have to go digging into multiple sub-menus. It's right here in front of you. And as you can see, the number of different options available to us to modulate source number one is really overwhelming. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole now, but I just wanted to introduce you to the concept. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit the like button to tell YouTube I don't suck, and I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.